CMON, and the Masters of the Universe.
And we got the co-designers for the Masters of the Universe, the board game Clash for Eternia, Michael Shinall and Lee Alameda. Thank you so much for coming on.
Good to see you again, Chase, Simon.
Thanks for inviting us.
So guys, obviously you guys have had a long history developing a whole variety of different board games with CMON. Can you talk a little bit about your background and interest in He-Man?
So when it comes to like Masters, it was one of those shows that like I was just slightly past the age bracket to grow up when it was fresh and everything. But I definitely did see like the reruns on TV with the other like 80s and early 90s cartoons and everything. And I actually had a number of the action figures when I was younger. I actually had the action figures before I knew about the show. So because my grandmother had literally just like bought like this toy chest of just like stuff. So I remember I had the mini faces and I think Faker were the two that I remember. Because remember I had the blue He-Man once I found out what that was, and I had many faces because he flipped around to show his many faces. But so I had those action figures, and they were much different than like the GI Joes or in later like the Power Rangers and stuff like that you would have. And then I do remember like the TV show, like it existing, that and She-Ra when I was growing up. I was never like one that was like, oh man, I'm gonna like I'm gonna get up early and watch this, like Chase and some of the super fans that had like the He-Man Halloween costumes. That was unfortunately not me. But that is one of those series that I remember watching. It wasn't one that like was like oh my god, this is amazing to me. But I never had anything against it or anything. It was just one of those just kind of background shows that I was aware that existed. And then like so many nostalgia things from that time period. It started making resurgences over the last decade or so. The internet and the wealth of memes and videos definitely helped out with He-Man. And now we're entering into this period where the nostalgia is going full force and everything that was old is new again. And you're beginning to see a resurgence of He-Man, not just the Netflix, but also things like that. And I actually was aware and had a number of the He-Man and Masters of the Universe comic books over the last like 15, 20 years. That was an area that I actually did pick some on. There was a period for about like 10 years that I didn't do any of the mainstream comics, but I did pick up just like single shots and things like that. So for example, like some of the Thundercats and the Masters of the Universe and some of the GI Joe comics, I did pick those up. And so that was actually an area that I had with He-Man. But other than that, it's again, it was something that existed when I grew up, but I was not like actively like, oh my god, I've got to follow this, but I was still aware of.
My background with He-Man before working in any games, it was very restrict. I actually got to know because of the internet and most of the memes. I'm 23, so if Michael passed the age bracket to watch He-Man, I got even further. But I know about the existence. The local resident TV passed sometimes, but I wasn't really much into TV. And I got to know them more about the memes. For example, I know the entire Song of Heya. I watched so many times, and I sang it like so many times. I know like the dance, the first one, but ever since we knew that we were going to work in the game, I applied myself very hard and got to read about every single character that we were working on, watch some of the cartoons and the comics as well. So, but yeah, before it was mostly memes.
We definitely did binge the original series, everything there as well. And that's something I do want to call out attention to, is that the first step of any IP that we deal with is like, you always want to like have an understanding of the IP. So the very first thing is we got 2 copies of the He-Man World Encyclopedia, a big tome. We watched the original series. When you do your due diligence and your research, you have to know enough about it and respect the original source material. Because this is 20 to 30 years of nostalgia and very close to the heart for a lot of people out there. So that's something I want to say, especially about Leo, is he put the work in here. I know there are going to be those people out there that are going to be like, oh, you have just this 23-year-old kid. He doesn't know anything about like, how can you understand the grandiose that is Masters of the Universe and all that? And like, thing is, he put the work in. I will just get this out of the way early. I dislike seeing is you do have that section of people that kind of try to gatekeep, they're like, oh, well, I'm an original vintage fan here. There's no such thing. I mean, you can be a fan at any age of anything. But more so when it comes to a professional aspect, we put the work in to make sure we understand the source material, to understand what makes an IP, popular and what the fans endure about it. Because you have to understand that stuff to make a good game about it. Otherwise, it's just, you can tell. You don't want to just reskin something and just like, oh, this is just a generic board game that just happens to have Masters of the Universe attached to it.
Yeah,
That's the wrong way about going about things.
I guess anytime you get an IP, we really got to know what the IP means to the players, so that we can execute that well.
Which we have to say was actually challenging when it came to a couple characters, because we have quite a number in the in the Masters archive that we were digging through, and some of those characters are only very vaguely represented as far as like actual backstory in source materials.
I guess we can't reference because we can't say which characters are in it, but
Right.
a lot of them are really hard. But yeah.
In time.
Well, we'll keep asking questions. I'm sure we can get something out of you before the end of the episode. But I just want to rewind a little bit, because Leo, you mentioned that you're actually really good at singing the song, and we're actually looking for some theme music for the podcast. So what we can do after this session, we'll get you set up, we record it, and hopefully we can have that ahead of introducing the show. Chase, what do you think?
That sounds great.
Perfect.
I'm not good at all at singing. I like to sing, but people don't enjoy my
I'm sure people like your singing too, so that'd be fantastic. So next up, one thing I want to discuss with you, and we've already touched on this a little bit, was the concept of power. Now, one thing which is extremely important to Master of the Universe, and there's one line is, I have the power. What does this mean to Clash of Eternia? When we talk about the concept of power, how does this manifest itself in the game?
So when it comes to power, we basically, when we were designing Clash for Eternia, we knew a system that we wanted to implement. And as we were developing it and everything further, we kind of came to the realization that what we were making was a good kind of structure system that we could potentially utilize elsewhere. So instead of just limiting this and saying, oh, this is the Masters of the Universe system, we decided to dub this the power system, which of course is a node to, I have the power and, the importance that that carries, in the setting. But the intent behind this was, and this is no promises for the future or anything like that, this is simply leaving us open design space more than anything, is we decided that we wanted to make a kind of a universal system that we could implement in other products or lines later if we so chose. If this game really takes off and people enjoy it, then this is that's something we wanted to have the potential to do. And so the core fundamentals of the game system that Clash for Eternia uses is basically the power system, which can be viewed as its own kind of system, which is basically you have power, which is this resource that is used to fuel everything in the game. And that can represent different things to different characters, stamina, magic, mana, whatever you want to call it, willpower. But it's the same fundamental resource that everything uses. And the idea is that being the one versus many nature of the game, or players versus AI, depending on how you're playing, it's this constant thing that's in flux. And the actual word we have for that is called the balance of power. And basically is as the players are utilizing their power to do their cool abilities and effects, this is directly funneling into the opposition and making them stronger as well. So there's this kind of fluxing back and forth of power, whereas the players need to be using this to stand a chance to win. But at the same time, both the sides are going to be keeping themselves in balance via this influx of power, good versus evil, light versus dark, whatever comparisons you want to make it as. So the game state is represented by that via when one side is using power, in this case the players, the opposition is gaining those resources as well in order to activate their own kind of Machiavellian plans.
Yeah, the power system works as a competitive game, right? It's a one versus many type of game, where the players, usually the many part, give the power that they use to the one player, which is the controller guy, which is controlling minions, usually doing the counterpart in a scenario. So that's how basically the power system works. It's always this players giving power to the controller so that they can do more DM things, like creating more minions, drawing cards, creating effects, and give that feeling that he's like the mastermind behind everything.
It sounds really exciting. So, this controller versus many, who are you fighting in the game? Who's on your team when you're going into battle?
So it depends. You're either playing as the Evil Warriors, which then you have Skeletor, Merman, Beastman, or you're playing as the Heroic Warriors, where you could be playing with He-Man, with Tila, Men-at-Arms, which then you could have even further characters that we're going to announce soon.
You sold me at Man-at-Arms. I think that's good. Yeah. I'm ready to go with that.
Yeah, but you could have more characters, right? So you could only team them together. So that's how you would function. Sometimes even the controller side could be the He-Man part. Usually in the scenarios they have their split, so you could play as He-Man and the Heroic Warriors being the controller side, generating minions trying to defend a castle, or even being the Evil Warriors being the ones trying to attack something, kidnap someone.
So we can switch back and forth.
Right. So that's one of the dynamics of the system that sets it apart, I think, from previous like one versus many is that, like, you know, in some of those games you would have, I guess there's two things to talk about. In like some versions of that game system, you would have like the dungeon master style role where, you know, they're just really trying to more so make it so it's an enjoyable experience for a lot of the players versus actually just trying to win. And that's definitely something we don't want people to have the mentality of here. You are trying to win here. And if you're not trying to win, you're going to lose. You know, this is not like you're not playing this role where you're basically acting as like the babysitter for the actual players and just making sure they're having a fun time like you would in D&D or something. This is a competitive game. You're going to need to actually be playing to win. If you're not actively trying to win and you're trying to take it easy on them, you're probably going to lose. But the other the dynamic that we have here is that with the Evil Warriors and the Heroic Warriors, either side can be piloted by the players or the controller. So you and your friends can band together as He-Man, Master at Arms, and, you know, like Leo was saying, versus the Evil Warriors, you know, with Skeletor and all them. Or that dynamic can be flipped over, where you're actually playing as Skeletor, Beastman, Merman, and all the Evil Warriors versus the Heroic Warriors who are controlled, who are piloted by the controller. So if you guys want to play a group of bad guys, you know, you can absolutely just do that. Every character in the game comes with a player version and a controller version, and actually an AI version as well, in case that's one of the methods you want to play.
I do find that the phrase, well, the word evil is so subjective sometimes. So, you know, obviously pick exactly which side you want to play. But you mentioned a little bit earlier about how you win at the game. So am I right in thinking there's different ways of winning as the controller or as the heroic players?
So everything is based around scenarios, and we effectively have 3 different types of scenarios. Now, we're going to have a ton of different ones, but we have ones that are called open scenarios. And this is basically ones that either side can be the controller or the players. For example, one of the basic ones we have is just a brawl scenario where you just want to fight each other. And either side can be the controller, either side can be the players. And that one has a very simple victory condition, which is just KO the opposing team a total of 5 times. That's just an example of like a very basic scenario. And then we have ones that are going to dictate which side has to be the controller and which side has to be the player. And these are usually going to follow into being more narrative focused. As Leo mentioned earlier, you might have one that, I guess this is some minor spoilers we can talk about. One of them would be a scenario where the Heroic Warriors are dictated as having to be the controller. And that is because their goal in that scenario is to escort Queen Marlena out of the battlefield and across, you know, and to try to help her escape. Whereas the Evil Warriors are trying to kidnap her.
A noble endeavor to protect her. Sounds great.
And then, so to flip that, we have another scenario that would be the players are controlling the Evil Warriors, and they're basically trying to ransack this village and steal these artifacts and resources from around the map. And the Heroic Warriors are the ones that are trying to stop them. Those scenarios will dictate, like, okay, this side has to be the controller, this side has to be the player characters. And then the final one we have are the AI scenarios, which a lot of the scenarios can be played via AI, like the brawl one that I mentioned earlier, the very basic combat one. That wouldn't be very easy just to throw the AI in there. But then we have some special scenarios that are built around the AI with some additional rules to how they function that are, you know, those can be played by a human controller as well. But basically we built their special rules around the fact that they will be controlled by an AI, because, you know, that's always a tricky thing to have, because, you know, we wanted people to be able to play the game co-op, you know, for those who prefer that. But at the same note, we will say, like, very openly that having a human brain behind the controller is going to be a much more dynamic experience than playing against AI, just because of the nature of how that works.
A lot of times I see some concerns over systems that add on things as like an afterthought. Has it always been the idea to have it be AI one versus many? Is that baked into the core identity of the game, or was it kind of like an extra thing added in?
Some parts of it, yes. The one versus many is the first thing that we thought as the power system exists. The co-op existing is something that we always kept in mind to doing, but it came along at the beginning of the process. We weren't sure that we were going to do it, but as we're going through, we realized it was possible and fairly easy to adapt, and it wouldn't be much different from the original experience from the game. So creating an AI and co-op experience is something that we always kept in mind, but realized that we could do and have actually done it as we were going through.
Yep, that's one of the important things to mention here, as Leo said, is that when we originally made the system, we went into it like, okay, we knew our foundations that we wanted with the one versus many. We had that developed, and we always had the idea like, okay, if we can incorporate an AI in here that actually works and is dynamic enough, then we will put it in. But if it was something that, we didn't feel was going to be doable or would feel like it's just thrown on there, then you don't include that. Most modern games, they're going to want to have solo play or co-op play, but it doesn't work for every game. And, that's a trapping that I feel some people do, is that they'll try to just incorporate that in there, even if it doesn't really work. And that's not something we wanted to do here. So once we were actually sure that it could function and actually be a viable way to play the game, then we expanded on it and incorporated it into the core dynamics. And we're happy to say that it came out pretty fun.
I mean, there are some things that didn't work and we didn't do, but
there are some other elements that I know going into the Kickstarter that people will ask for, but we did not include them for specific reasons. And I will say that they weren't included for a reason. So I mean, I know that this is going to get absolutely just buried under all the information that comes out, but there are definitely other systems and methods that we explored potentially doing. I'm not going to name any specifics, but essentially, if they don't show up during the campaign, that's because we probably tried them and we didn't feel they were dynamic or brought enough to gameplay to warrant including. Basically, we didn't want anything that was just tacked on.
Fantastic.
That's a really refreshing approach, because it's so easy for people just to say, tick that box, let's get it out, fantastic. People probably won't try it, but actually having it baked into the game and something which you've tried these permutations and figured it just isn't this type of game. It really gives people a fantastic experience. So that's great. Now, as we know from the Masters of the Universe, there are a tremendous number of different characters. And we're all represented here today as different characters from our alternate universe. So one thing that people are going to want to do in game is to play certain characters because they have certain characteristics. And that's very much reflected in everything you see. Can you talk a little bit about the character design and how you went through that particular process? So, for instance, when you're playing He-Man, it feels like He-Man, or if you want to be Ram-Man, you can be angry and basically headbutt everybody. How have you gone ahead and done that in the design?
So since we don't want to spoil any surprises, I mean, that's the thing, Simon, Chase, this is a CMON Kickstarter. I mean, people kind of have expectations going into it, and especially given the setting here. So when I say that our core box contains, 12 characters, 6 per side, I don't think it's any secret that's going to get anyone in trouble to go there's probably going to be more characters revealed as the campaign goes on. But for the sake of discussion, we will limit it to just core box. So that is actually fairly limited in the spectrum of characters that we can speak of, which I guess is another hint if 12 is limiting to talk about. But so we wanted to first and foremost make sure that every single character was two criteria. One, felt unique. So, I shouldn't be playing He-Man and he shouldn't be playing the same as Man-at-Arms, as Teela, as Orko. That would be a disservice to the character. But beyond that, we want to make sure that every character actually felt like their representation, because people have an expectation about how does Man-at-Arms play? How should Teela play? How should He-Man play? When you look at He-Man, if you can go into Masters Universe knowing nothing about the franchise of the line, but when you see He-Man, you have a certain expectation about what he does. Oh, look, he has the power. It's this barbarian-looking muscle man with a giant sword. You kind of have an idea of what he does, but we wanted to have this mix of, if I look at Man-at-Arms, okay, I can look at his name, I can kind of look at the character and kind of have an idea about what he does. I can look at He-Man and kind of get the idea. But then you have the actual full fans of the franchise who they know that Duncan Man-at-Arms, he's a tactical genius. He's not just a guy who just runs out there and beats people with a power mace and shoots people with a laser rifle and a freeze ray.
Because he uses his brain.
Right. My brain is the most powerful weapon of all, kids.
Remember, kids.
Wow.
Which is actually something He-Man said too. But anyway, point is that, we want to make sure that every character felt diverse and unique. And I actually let Leo speak a little bit more onto that. because we spent a lot of time making all the different characters and everything. It was interesting just getting random messages and such from Leo when we were researching the characters, and sometimes be like, wait, this guy does what? Or this guy's power is this? It was just interesting seeing that fresh perspective. Some of those things were like, oh yeah, that makes total sense. And then looking at it and going like, well, I guess that makes sense from this is a show and toy line from the 80s makes sense versus any basis in reality.
Well, yeah, starting off, even though the game has like objectives and they're probably going to smash each other like as in combat to go to that, we're trying to make every character unique, and the way that they accomplish that is very different. So if you're going like with a magic character, the way that he does his things, of course, he's going to have like ranged attacks and magic attacks and things like that. But also the utility that he has and how he applies that is very different. And we try to incorporate most of the characteristics that they had in the comics or the show. So every time we would make up a character, we had to look like thoroughly at like every appearance that he had and things that they did. Of course, it was very hard because some characters were used as comic relief, and that made like very hard for some characters to have like lots of different abilities. But most of the characters that could be very different, they had their like signature moves and different ways to apply their power, right? So for example, you have He-Man that has a lot of like, he's a strong guy, so of course he has strong blows and things like that, but he also can like do a power jump and like move fast or some things like that. So trying to incorporate those into every single character. I can't spoil more characters, but I would like to give an example about some characters that are very hard because they don't have any powers, but even then
to be revealed.
Yeah, to be revealed. And I gotta say, even that character, in my opinion, is one of the like best characters. Like different, they play very differently and they are really unique. So yeah.
Sorry, I do have to jump in here with one technical, like, I'm not going to say like legalese thing, but I just want to have a disclaimer. There we go. Let's say a nice disclaimer here. What we have here for Clash of Eternia, this is based on the original 1982, 1983 toy line specifically. So all the aesthetics and everything you'll see in the primary, I guess, descriptions, they all come from the toy line. So while we are drawing elements from everything related to He-Man and, its 30 years of history, the primary thing you're going to see is things that are based on the aesthetics of the toy line. So, for example, like those little blurb, like trading card descriptions you see on the back of the toy packages, those are like the primary thing you're going to see. The visual aesthetics, which this was actually called out during the last live stream we did, those are all drawn from the toy line as well. So like Skeletor with his little clawed feet that he has, those are unique to the toy line and didn't appear in some of the other medium where he had just normal feet with boring normal feet. But that's the type of thing there. So while we do have elements that are explored from the entire range of He-Man, the predominant thing you're going to see is drawn from the toy line. So, this is not necessarily like, this is not something that we'll say like, oh, this is based on the TV show or based on the classics line or based on the remastered line or based on the He-Man in Space 1996 line, which is definitely not something anyone should ever do. Just pointing out, like, this is first and foremost based on the original toy line, but we're not really adhering to any specific like canon storyline or anything like that. So if anyone's coming into this expecting like, oh, this is going to be based on, and I'm just throwing this completely out there, like, oh, everything's going to be based on like the Revelations Netflix series. That's not the case here. This is not based on any specific medium outside of the toy line. And
that's the reason why some characters, even though they can like levitate and things like that, they use a crossbow or a sword and an axe.
That is true. So like, yes, this is heavily based on the accessories that came with the toys as well, which, yes. So I will say that there are a disproportionate amount of characters in the line that had the same shield in a different colored plastic and the same crossbow in a different colored plastic. But
even if they had like powers that really didn't like make sense for them to use like a sword, if they can like, I can't give spoilers, so I won't say, but something that would be more effective.
Yeah, it's you got some situations where like, oh, they've got this, infinite cosmic power that, would make them just completely overpowered in any situation. But they also got the crossbow. I guess if they're feeling
Yes.
just like lazy about like using that power or whatnot. So
I mean, to not sound like that's bad. Of course, in the game we have like progression, right? So as the game goes on, your character gets stronger and stronger. So like the basic features like sword and axe and things like that, it's going to be like the basic things that they can do. And as the game goes, they're going to be able to uh, uh, like develop their skills and be able to do
and we also don't want to give the impression that like, oh, you've got, a bunch of characters that just start with a crossbow, because even if they have the same weapon, we've incorporated them in different ways, so no, it's not just going to be like, oh, look, we've got 10 guys with crossbow attack or 10 guys with sword attack. Laser pistol was one of the most common accessories. Yes.
Yeah.
Hey, they're useful, right? You gotta.
They got the job done, I gotta say.
Yeah, exactly. So for power advancement, so how does that exactly work in the game then?
So the progression of the game works as depending on the scenario. So each scenario has their own like objective for them to have their win condition. And as they're going through it, they're going to advance the game. And every time they hit a certain checkpoint, both the controller and the players will gain new skills. In the case of the players, they're going to have like skills based on which thing that they unlock. So if it's at the beginning, they're going to have initial skill, and if they in the middle of the game, they're going to have a medium skill, and at the end, they're going to have like the best possible ability that they could have. While the controller, every time he gets a new ability, an upgrade, he would just increase the ability to like summon more minions or increase the buffs that he could give to one of their characters and things like that. So it depends on which scenario they're playing, and usually caused by going through the end of the scenario. So if you're in the beginning, you won't have many powers, but as you're going to the end of the scenario, you're progressing as the scenario goes on.
I guess just to get into a little bit more specifics there. So like when you're playing as a player character, you have 3 different levels of skill: green, yellow, and red. And at different points during the game, based on the scenario, you'll unlock like your green skill, which will give you 2 options. Like it's a double-sided mini card. So for example, He-Man, he can start by either getting like throw or mighty leap, and then he can advance like later in the game, he'll get his yellow skill. And then toward the kind of the halfway point, 3/4 of the way point, you'll unlock your red skill, which is like your ultimate like badass skill and everything. The controller side, meanwhile, has 4 skills that they start with, and as the game goes on, they will instead start upgrading those skills to have different effects. So like your skill that summons minions will instead summon like some empowered minions, give them extra actions. The one that gives you like attack boost and defense boost to your characters will increase those benefits. So even as the controller, you've got different ways you can kind of build out based on the scenario you're playing. And as Leo mentioned, every scenario gives different means that like that the game escalates. So again, I'm going to go back to that example I keep going to, that very easy kind of brawl scenario. That one, the game escalates every time a character is KO'd, which is also the victory condition. So, every time characters get KO'd, the game escalates, and basically players and the controller will start leveling up. And that varies based on scenario. So let's talk about another example here, like the Marlena one. Marlena spawns with a number of royal guards. And so like in that scenario, and also noting all this is subject to change based on development. So, a year from now, someone should go like, hey, this is different. Yeah, it might be. But like anytime Marlena gets wounded or she loses a royal guard, that triggers escalation in that scenario. So again, this is just another dynamic that you have there.
So you mean these things you're saying won't be true for an Eternia?
We're done here. Done. I'm out.
So let me try and recover quickly then. So the game sounds like it's like a really open framework where different characters and different players can interact. And it almost seems like storytelling is quite important in terms of what happens within the game itself. There's obviously a lot of different actions and sort of interaction between different characters. Can you talk a little bit about how you've seen that when you've been designing the game? Have you had any good experiences where you've actually have like memorable games where you've told a story which you can sort of retell at this time?
I guess the most memorable one is after we did Merman, the character, we were going to test it, and we were saying like, oh my god, he might be the most strongest character in the game, and how he was used as comic relief in the series and things like that. And as we were playing it, he was the best character in the game, and we weren't sure if we were going to make him worse because we wanted to avenge the whole backstory that he had as being just used as comic relief and being like super weak. So I guess that's one of the most like interesting stories.
There's a lot of them, but one that comes to my mind actually, Leo actually made me think of this one, was going back to that Marlena scenario. And I know I keep coming back to that one, but that one just that scenario for some reason just leads to a lot of fun dynamics about just what happens. Because again, Marlena is trying to escape off this other side of the map. And, she's not just a pushover, she can actually fight. But one of the structures, the way that's set up, and I guess I'll go into a small bit of explanation here, is that you have a blank battlefield, and then each scenario dictates where you place a number of overlays onto the map, which represent different terrain. So you have like mountains with rocks and like forests and ruins and like deadly plants and boulders that you can pick up and throw at your opponent and everything. Very much supposed to reminisce of that play set kind of feel. That like, you always like you might have had your action figures that you were clashing against each other as a kid, but then you always pictured that, they're fighting in, like the quarry or like the hillside, or we're giving you the means to recreate that. So in this one, I remember that like there's this little pathway in between these two big like craggy rocks, and if you climb up on the mountains you get extra combat bonuses, but it's also very hard to traverse. So Marlena is basically running through this little like kind of chasm, and the royal guards are just like dropping around her as like Beastman is just hurling boulders at them, and she's almost about to get away, just almost, and then Beastman shows up and spawns these shadow beasts in front of her and just end up very Saturday morning violence. No actual people were harmed in this. Picking her up and non-violently throwing her back away from the exit that she's about to get to, and she's literally like a turn away from winning. And it's just this pairing of shadow beasts that just pick her up and just toss her to the other one, and then like hot potato her further back. And it was just like, oh no, I thought that they were literally about to win just in the next turn, and all of a sudden they're just like thrown all the way back here, and it was just like snatching defeat from the jaws of victory moment there.
And these are gonna be really exciting things to recreate. And if anything, all right, I think CMON, you guys are known for cool minis. So we can take a look here at exclusive here. We have an image of Trapjaw, and my gosh, is he just looking fantastic. Now, Trapjaw is going to be in the core box, and he's just wonderfully painted here and just such a dynamic pose. How big are the miniatures going to be?
So these miniatures are a bit bigger than our standard ones. If I recall correctly, and I can't be quoted on this because I'm not 90% sure, I believe they're 35 millimeter from base to top. And that's actually because if you see on here, we have given them dynamic bases with these miniatures as well.
And if we flip over and look at Orko here, you can see that exactly. Another beautifully painted one.
It kind of looks like he's floating, doesn't he? The paint jobs in these are incredible. Who actually painted these?
So full credit here. This is done like so many of our other projects by Big Child Creative. They're the painters behind this. And of course, everything they do makes you feel bad about your own painting skills. Even if you're not a painter, you're just like, well, I'm never going to start that. This is the same studio that had to release a video, like during our Marvel Unite Kickstarter, had to release a video showing the models because people were accusing them of photoshopping the models. Like that's the level of talent we're talking about here.
This is so crushingly inspirational. I'll tell you that right now. This is no way. This is absolutely amazing. They look unreal.
And this was one of the dynamics that we wanted to hit here is that like, while again, this is based on the toy line, we wanted to make sure that the models looked, that mixture of intimidating and keeping that Masters Universe aesthetic. And that's been the thing that's permeated through the entire project. Our lead graphic artist that we have on this project, he is probably one of the biggest He-Man fans in Brazil. Like he has imported the toys, the action figures. So, he basically, I think,
cosplayed as He-Man.
He did cosplay as He-Man at one of our office parties that we had for Halloween one year.
Hey, there we go.
Yeah, and the problem is that he's got the physical physique to pull it off too, which is another just infuriating thing.
Sickening.
Yeah, it's like, damn it, man. But aside from being the graphic artist assigned for the project, he also was acting as one of the kind of the lore proofers for everything we did. Just to get as many, because the thing is, we got as many set of eyes from people that just knew nothing about He-Man, but also the He-Man experts, to make sure that the characters were representative of their source material. When we're talking about Max here, our graphic artist, I don't want to throw too many names out there just in case he doesn't want that out there.
This is exactly what Master of the Universe fans are after. They're looking for these very, very specific depictions with an eye to accuracy. And I know this is part of the game, but the models themselves certainly stand alone. I think a lot of people are just going to buy the game just to collect all these figures, which, to be honest, have not been available. Most of them are action figures. So to get them at this scale is going to be really, really attractive to a whole bunch of fans.
Oh yeah, and we definitely have a dynamic range of surprises for people that, of course, we can't get into specifics here about, but I think that during the campaign, it's going to be a fun roller coaster ride for people.
And so, what's next? What do we have to look forward to in the intermediate? Are there other places that we'll be hearing about the Masters of the Universe, the board game Clash for Eternia property?
So that is under the full delegation of our marketing team and how that information gets trickled out. We have a lot of cool stuff planned, and I really hate that kind of conversation because it's like, oh man, we have so much cool stuff. No, we can't talk about any of it. No, I can't tell you any specifics. But man, you just got to trust us. It's going to be super cool. That kind of like that's kind of a killjoy kind of conversation. I guess since we've to give you guys some like cool stuff to talk about, since we've gone ahead and shown the images of Trapjaw and Orko here, we can kind of go into like a little bit of a mini deep dive talking about the dynamics of each of those characters and what makes them unique compared to the others. I think that'll give a really good kind of presentation there to show how different these characters can be compared to each other.
Yeah, so with Trapjaw, which for me is one of my favorite from the core box, he has his abilities, as Michael said before. We have like green abilities, yellow and red. They when you get to that point and you unlock that skill, you're able to choose which side you're going to pick. Usually from all the other characters, when you pick one side, you're set for that power for the rest of the game. You can pick another one in another scenario, but for the game, you can only have the power that you chose. And Trapjaw, he has his skills, they flip. So to incorporate the idea that he can change the weapons that he has. So for example, on Trapjaw, in his green ability, you can either flip from being the claw and the grabber. So you could incorporate the idea of the character changing his weapons as it sees most fitting way. So it's really cool, and he has that across all his abilities. So it's one of the coolest things that it makes him very different from everyone else because he can flip his ability. And also because it shows the part that he can change his weapons very quickly in his story and the lore.
That's funny because you kind of strike me as a little bit of a Beastman fan, but Trapjaw certainly is key there. And Michael, how about you? What about Orko here?
So I will say that Orko is not particularly my play style, but I enjoy the utility that he brings. I will say like the two most powerful like spellcasters that we have in the core box are probably going to be Evil Lyn and Orko. Mm-hmm. Well, I say that, but then my mind immediately goes like, well, Skeletor is in that category as well. Skeletor is a little more versatile into what he can do because he's not necessarily just always about casting spells versus Evil Lyn, who's like 100% casting spells, and Orko, who is 100% about casting spells. Orko is not going to be brawling up there in melee, but the dynamics of Orko is, he's got, his Trollian magics, and everything is not exactly controllable. So most of his effects, he has this wide gambit of stuff he can do, but it always comes with, there's the potential it might backlash. So, like, for example, his green skills that he has is you're going to get the option between his Endless Hat or a Magic Shield. So he can throw down a Magic Shield, which is a little bit more reliable and safe to protect himself and his allies versus attacks. Or you can go with the Endless Hat, which is literally he's just going to open up his hat, which as fans of some of the source materials note, just as this extra dimensional space that he keeps just everything in. And you're going to get some semi-controllable random benefits as to what he manages to pull out at the time. And that's going to be, you're going to roll a die, and depending on the result you get, he might heal guys, or he might give his allies power, or he might cause a magical backlash that just blows up the entire area he's in, and everyone suffers some damage, which actually might be beneficial at the time. Who knows? But either way, it's a little uncontrollable. As he starts leveling up, he'll gain access to other abilities like being able to teleport guys, or his little dazzle attack where he can daze enemies around him. And this all kind of culminates up with his red skills, which are his like penultimate ones, where one of his options is actually he can get his magic wand, which I've mentioned this in several times in previous talks because I don't know, it just keeps coming up. But like Orko, like when he gets his magic wand in the source materials, that's basically the fulcrum for his powers, and it stops being like random. He becomes literally one of the most powerful characters in the setting when he gets his wand. But like in game, that gives him extra bonus power, but it also allows him to start manipulating the random die rolls that he has. So you can actually start paying power from that skill to reroll dice, or actually just straight up change the die facing, which a lot of his effects, because they're semi-random, now you have a lot more control over them. And that just shows some of the dynamic nature of like, oh, how do you want to, build this character out, and how does that, represent, those little elements of, how they function in like, the source setting.
And I like how you referenced like the Trollian magic, and it's just gonna be fun to see these themes brought together with this awesome gameplay you've described. So as we're heading out here, number one, if you want to find out more about Masters of the Universe, the board game Clash for Eternia, be sure to check out the CMON Facebook page, as well as On the Table Gaming on YouTube and our social media. We're going to be covering this game closely. And then you guys have your Q&A on the 23rd of July. And so if you finish this video and you haven't had a chance to see that yet, that's live streamed on their Facebook page. But you can also go check out the past recording of it, which will be saved on the CMON official Facebook page as well. And, we look forward to the Kickstarter in September. We're really excited. So thanks so much for coming on here.
Thanks for the invite. Looking forward for the Kickstarter as well.
It's going to be great. And we've got we've got a lot of content that we'll be talking about in the coming weeks and also during the full campaign. So it's going to be a fun roller coaster. We're going to enter some exciting times here.
It looks like you guys have really are living up to the hype of making the most powerful game in the universe.
Definitely. That's the objective. I hope that we achieve.
I don't like feeling good. I like feeling evil.
And thanks everyone for tuning in. And in the meantime, we hope you get your miniatures on the table.